So in sharp contrast to the video I did the other day where I talked about warm, cozy, feel-good games for the Steam Deck to kind of cheer you up in the dead of winter, today's video is a complete 180 from that where I talk about what it was like for me to play through the recently released Silent Hill: The Short Message. Now, I've mentioned Silent Hill a few times on the channel before, usually in reference to modern horror games and how they pay homage to Silent Hill, or just, how some games in the horror genre today are kind of pulling off some of the same magic tricks that Silent Hill managed to pull off. And honestly, I would hesitate to call myself like a connoisseur or a straight up expert in any particular game or series of games, right? I've played a lot of games over the years, I've beaten a lot of games, but I don't know that I would really consider myself like the ultimate authority on any one particular game or series of games. However, if there was one where I would be close to comfortable calling myself that, it would be Silent Hill, just because I have such an incredible reverence and respect and love of that game and the series, at least the earliest entries, that it's an easy, thing for me to talk about, connect with, and to get excited about whenever new news comes out. And considering back in 2022, right at the tail end there, we got the update from Konami, the Silent Hill transmission, where they outlined a number of new projects, including a new movie, a number of new titles, and also the Silent Hill 2 remake, which I'm still very excited about and cautiously optimistic about. This is really the first game that we've seen really come out that, really embodies everything that they're trying to do with Silent Hill. And when it comes to those initial efforts in the Silent Hill renaissance that Konami's kind of orchestrating right now, I would say that if Silent Hill Ascension did everything wrong out of the gate, Silent Hill: The Short Message really does everything right when it's at its best. Now, when it's not at its best, it's a little bit dicier, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. For now, let's just go ahead and dive right in and talk about my personal, spoiler-free thoughts on Silent Hill: The Short Message and why I think it is definitely worth your time, and that despite its flaws, is still something that manages to elevate and expand the world of Silent Hill. Now, the setup for Silent Hill: The Short Message is that you'll be playing as a young girl named Anita who gets a message from her friend Maya beckoning her to meet up in the Villa, an apartment complex in the fictional town of Kettenstadt, Germany. But naturally, Maya's nowhere to be found, and in short order you'll be searching high and low throughout the villa while the rest of the story and its players begin to fall into place. At its core, this Silent Hill game is very much a walking simulator that leans on about two game flavors: search and escape. Technically, there are about 1.5 puzzles to solve as well, but most of the time you'll be walking or potentially running through the villa while gaining a deeper understanding of its world and characters. And again, I would say it mostly succeeds at what it sets out to do, so let's start by talking about the things that I really liked about Silent Hill: The Short Message. For starters, the world itself is extremely well realized, and I found that unsettling pretty much from the jump. Obviously, early entries in the franchise set a really high bar for building environmental tension, and The Short Message mostly succeeds in this regard. Everything feels appropriately lived in and decayed, and as the game progresses, it even manages to provide a close-up look at how the gradual deterioration of the villa played out. And I thought this was particularly neat because while it's not really anything new to see a completely gross environment in a horror setting, it's not often that you see a game go to great lengths to explain how it got into that gross setting and really show it to you in a really impactful, sort of tactile way. So I really appreciated The Short Message taking the time to offer up an explanation for how its terrifying world came to be terrifying in the first place, and accomplishing this essentially without any supernatural elements in play. Also, exploring the villa is made easier thanks to the light on your cell phone, which is another simple mechanic I appreciate for one reason in particular, and that is at one point they take this phone away from you, or at least they take its functionality away from you. And during this time, this leaves you in a place where you can't light up the environment to explore, you can't review your notes, and you can't send text messages, which, for a brief time, leaves you in an uncertain limbo state and really only heightens the tension overall. This whole sequence feels like a throwback to a late game portion of Silent Hill 2 where you have to sacrifice all of your items temporarily to explore an unknown area, and actually I think Code Veronica pulled this as well a little bit before Silent Hill 2 did it. But anyways, the point is it's not a particularly new trick to pull, but it is an effective one, and even seeing it play out in this tiny snippet of a Silent Hill experience was pretty cool. Another thing it gets right, specifically as a Silent Hill game, is that its horror elements are really grounded in real-world terror. It's clear a lot of effort went into making sure that the dangers you encounter have some direct narrative reason to exist, and I really appreciate that they did this. Nothing in here feels spooky for the sake of it, although I will say that while I appreciate a few subtle nods to the original games, some of those nods get dangerously close to being a little too blatant, but that's something players will have to decide for themselves as they run across them if they're fans of the series. Another thing I really appreciate is that The Short Message demonstrably elevates and expands the Silent Hill mythos. For the most part, Silent Hill isn't directly referenced throughout your playtime save for one specific section. You'll definitely know when you get there, but personally I like that it expands the reach of the town of Silent Hill and provides some plausible explanation for how those events and phenomena can translate to other places. And I know Silent Hill's reach has exceeded its own borders in prior entries to neighboring towns and characters, but the way they handled it here seems to not only inform you as the player of its connection to Silent Hill, but it also signals a wider awareness of Silent Hill within its world. And I know some people are definitely going to hate this, but personally I thought it was a great way to start setting the stage for more Silent Hill games while also firmly anchoring the short message within the Silent Hill universe. At first I was a little concerned that this was just going to be a spooky haunted house sort of game with a Silent Hill label slapped onto it, but I'm really glad that the developers took the time to elevate it beyond that and not let the game descend into just like, some parody of Silent Hill or something. But as much as I love all of the things that the short message gets right, some of its missteps definitely betray the Silent Hill experience as a whole, and that's what I want to talk about now, starting with the fact that it has an almost complete lack of subtlety. There isn't a ton of symbolism present throughout your time with the short message, although I will say what is there is pretty on the nose. A lot of the short message's narrative plays out by finding notes, which for the most part do make it feel grounded within its world. But sometimes it feels like it's trying so hard to spoon feed you every part of the narrative that it doesn't really leave a lot of room for organic discovery or piecing together the story on your own. Which itself is a huge part of what makes a good Silent Hill experience in my opinion. And honestly, this is probably one of the things that let the Silent Hill community thrive as long as it has, being so starved for games for so long. Because if there's one thing the Silent Hill community loves, it's poring over tons of details and piecing together larger mysteries from scraps. Sure, sometimes all of that fan detective work and theorizing goes to some really weird places. Theories on Walter from Silent Hill 4 in particular spring to mind. That's a weird rabbit hole to go down. But one of Silent Hill's biggest draws as a franchise for players is making the town feel like a character itself, and the best entry season the player's mind with a light dusting of lore bits over and over rather than just doling them out in essay format. And unfortunately, the short message just doesn't leave a lot to the imagination that you can pore over. And I think that's a problem for the game on two fronts. The first is that a lot of the biggest plot points and mysteries surrounding the villa are given out through text notes. That's not, damnable in its own right or anything. Lots of games rely on environmental text, audio, or video logs to fill in the gaps in the story, but again, the short message spends so much time spoon-feeding you all of the narrative beats that there's very little room for interpretation or piecing together your own theories. Which is a real shame because so much of the atmosphere on offer in the short message is really well done, with exactly the sort of dilapidated, dingy appearance that you'd expect from a Silent Hill game, and pretty good justification for it to be in that state. And putting aside the ho-hum nature of collecting a bunch of environmental notes to flesh out the story, the portions of the narrative that do get doled out in cutscenes or audio are, again, pretty on the nose. Most of the time it's fine. In fact, some of the audio lines that don't sound pitch perfect according to the drama that they're offering still succeed in a way, because they sound kind of off in the way that voice acting from the earliest entries of Silent Hill did. I know there's still some debate over whether the stilted delivery from characters in Silent Hill 2 was done intentionally, since most of the characters are pretty detached from reality, or whether that was done unintentionally and just kind of poorly executed. And honestly, I don't really care either way which one it is, because for me, that sort of stilted delivery or that sort of offness about the presentation or the audio has always been kind of like an endearing cornerstone of Silent Hill's presentation. But in the short message, at least a few of the emotional moments that you kind of get to put together on your own when they do decide to kind of, let you do some of the grunt work and filling in the gaps, gets undercut when you have a character literally yelling it at you 20 minutes later. It just causes a lot of the drama that should have been created there to just fall sort of unintentionally flat. Now, before I dive into this next criticism, I just want to say up front that this was really born from just like a random tweet that I saw from someone the other day. Someone basically took issue with the fact that there was a mental health warning for this game, and at first I just sort of rolled my eyes because, call me crazy, but I think it's, pretty normal to, encourage people to look after their mental health, and depending on where you're at with your mental health, Silent Hill, the short message, may be a terrible game for you to play. However, after I experienced it for myself, I kind of see where that guy was coming from now. Because considering that I've now beaten it, I have to say the constant pop-ups warning me about the dark themes of the game and resources for help did seem a little excessive after a while. Before the game starts, you see the warning page, and after you actually hit X to start the game, you see it again. And if I'm remembering right, at least 2 more times after key events in the story transpire, you're also going to be presented with the same text, which goes over mental health and, resources for help. And when these popped up during the narrative beats, I almost thought this was the end of the game, but nope, there was still more to play, and the more I saw the warning, the more it sort of took me out of the experience and reminded me I was playing a game. By and large, I think the slight inconvenience of having it shown over and over probably gets trumped by the fact that it is an admirable thing to include as a safety measure, but going back to that rando on Twitter, I probably shouldn't have jumped to conclusions so quickly because honestly, yeah, I do see how it could be distracting now, and I can't say that this shouldn't have been included at all, but maybe an option to disable it after you've seen it once or twice would have been helpful, but yeah, at the same time, it might be a liability thing for Konami as well, so I can see why they included it, but yeah, for anybody who said like, oh, it was kind of annoying seeing this warning, like, yes, the warning itself is not annoying, but having it pop up 4 or 5 times throughout the course of play does get a little bit tedious. And speaking of repetition, I think my last major complaint or point of contention with Silent Hill: The Short Message is its primary horror mechanic, which is to escape something terrifying that is chasing you. Obviously, the feeling of being chased is terrifying, particularly in a game like this where you have no real way of fighting back. And the chase sequences of The Short Message feel pretty balanced for the most part, and it can be a lot of fun, but if you get stuck, particularly in one of the later sequences, it can be a little bit of a slog trying to survive a cat and mouse game while desperately searching for an exit. Now, I wouldn't say it quite crosses over into frustrating or rage quit territory, but it gets awfully close, and if it weren't as short as it is, this portion of the gameplay could have really derailed the entire experience. Again, chase mechanics can be fun if done correctly, and not too long ago I got a taste of that in Rewind or Die, and it was great, but make no mistake, it can definitely put up a stiff challenge here, which I'm sure is going to turn some players off of the experience entirely. Although if you do stick with it, you will find it to be fulfilling, and that Silent Hill: The Short Message does tell a complete and fairly competent horror story. To wrap this whole thing up, I guess the best way I can explain is it sort of feels like the reluctant upvote meme in my head, in that the more I played it, there were so many things that I wanted to dock for, specifically when it was like crude and obvious when it came to narrative, which can be pretty bad for a Silent Hill game. But because it got so many other things right, like the atmosphere, subtle nods to classic moments, locations, and feelings from the original Silent Hill games, all while telling its own complete, if not slightly flawed story, was enough for me to enjoy and, well, ultimately endorse it. Now, it's hardly the best game in the Silent Hill mythos, but I think it does represent an excellent little vertical slice of the Silent Hill experience as a whole. But hey, if you want to make your own judgment, you absolutely should, because again, this is a game that is free to download and play on the PS5 right now, and at that point, it at the very least, I think, serves as a way to sort of stoke people's excitement for the Silent Hill 2 remake, or what Konami is going to accomplish with the entirely new Silent Hill games moving forward. And I have to say that personally, it does make me a little bit more optimistic for where Silent Hill is heading from this point forward. But hey, what about you? Have you had a chance to play Silent Hill: The Short Message yet? And if so, what did you think? And if you're somebody who's incredibly well versed in the lore of Silent Hill, more so than I am, if I've messed anything up, or if you have any, of your own observations or feedback about the game, please let me know in the comments below, because I would love to hear your thoughts on it. As always, thanks so much for your time and hanging out here on the channel. It means a lot to me. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.